On June 9, 2024, the internet exploded. A 50-year-old agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia had apparently just expired, and the story went viral, sparking predictions of economic Armageddon. The claim was huge. Saudi Arabia had just walked away from the secret pact that made the US dollar king, the petrodollar system. For half a century, this arrangement was the hidden engine of the American economy and the bedrock of its global dominance. Suddenly, headlines screamed that the world's largest oil exporter was free to sell its black gold in any currency it wanted: Chinese yuan, euros, maybe even Bitcoin. Many feared this was the first domino in the collapse of the dollar, a move that would crash the world economy and officially end the American century. But while the internet was buzzing with panic, the mainstream media was weirdly quiet. So, what's the real story? Did a legendary deal that defined the modern world actually just die? We're going to investigate the truth behind this 50-year-old pact and what's really going on between the US and Saudi Arabia. The real story is far more complex and fascinating than the rumors suggest, and it will change how you see money, power, and the future of the global economy. Petrodollar dying, such a big deal. To get it, we have to go back to the early 1970s. The world was in chaos, and the United States was in serious trouble. The nation was bogged down in the costly Vietnam War, and its economy was buckling under high inflation and massive government spending. For decades, the global financial system ran on the Bretton Woods Agreement, a deal made in 1944 where the US dollar was pegged to gold, and every other major currency was pegged to the dollar. This meant any country could, in theory, trade its US dollars for a fixed amount of gold from the US Treasury. This system made the dollar the world's reserve currency, giving America incredible economic power. But by 1971, that power was slipping. America's allies in Europe, holding mountains of dollars, started getting nervous. They saw the US printing money non-stop to pay for the war and social programs, and they started demanding gold for their dollars, draining America's vaults at a frightening pace. President Richard Nixon was cornered. On August 15, 1971, he made a stunning announcement that sent shockwaves around the planet. He unilaterally closed the gold window, severing the dollar's last tie to gold. This became known as the Nixon shock. Overnight, the world's financial system was cut loose. Currencies started floating freely against each other, creating chaos and volatility. The US dollar, no longer backed by anything real, was in a freefall. American dominance was facing its biggest test yet. Then, things got even worse. In October 1973, the Middle East exploded. In response to US support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, did the unthinkable. They launched a full oil embargo against the United States and its allies. The price of oil quadrupled almost overnight. Gas stations ran dry, economies slammed to a halt, and the world was thrown into its first global oil crisis. For the US, it was a humiliating display of just how vulnerable it was. Its entire economy was being held hostage. Nixon and his legendary Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, knew they needed a new way to anchor the dollar and neutralize the oil weapon. Their solution would be a brilliant piece of economic strategy that would reshape the world for the next 50 years. And their target was the heart of oil power itself, Saudi Arabia. The story goes that in 1974, US Treasury Secretary William Simon flew on a secret mission to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The world was still shaken by the oil shock, and officially the trip was about economic cooperation. But behind closed doors, a much bigger deal was being hammered out. This is where the legend of the petrodollar was born. According to the legend, the US offered the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a historic bargain. In exchange for American military protection, weapons, and political backing, Saudi Arabia would do two crucial things. First, it would price all of its oil exports exclusively in US dollars, and use its influence to get the rest of OPEC to do the same. Second, it would invest its massive oil profits, its billions of petrodollars, back into US Treasury bonds. If you think about it, the plan was ingenious. It would create a permanent, artificial demand for the US dollar all over the world. Any country that needed to buy oil, which was pretty much every country, would have to get US dollars first. This would prop up the dollar's value, letting the US keep spending without causing hyperinflation. And by having the Saudis recycle their oil money into US government debt, America found a bottomless source of cheap financing for its budget deficits. It was a perfect loop. Saudi Arabia got security and a safe investment for its fortune. The United States got to keep its economic empire, replacing the gold standard with a new oil standard. This system is what's known as petrodollar recycling. It created a circular flow of money. The US buys oil from Saudi Arabia with dollars, and Saudi Arabia uses those same dollars to buy US debt, which then helps finance the US government. This alleged deal made the US dollar the mandatory currency for the world's most important commodity. It was the source of what one French finance minister called America's exorbitant privilege, the power to print the world's money and basically export its inflation to everyone else. While other countries had to actually earn foreign currency to pay for things, the US could just print more of its own. It was America's 50-year free lunch. For decades, this unspoken pact seemed to work perfectly. The dollar stayed on top, oil was priced in dollars, and Saudi Arabia became a massive holder of US debt. The system survived the Cold War, regional conflicts, and wild oil price swings. It became such a fundamental part of the global economy that most people just took it for granted. And that's the legend that has everyone panicking now. The idea that this foundational deal has expired suggests that a pillar of the global economy has been kicked out, and the whole thing is about to come crashing down. This system, whether it was a formal deal or just a handshake agreement, has shaped our world for half a century. Understanding these hidden forces is the key to making sense of the global economy. If you love getting to the bottom of these huge, complex topics, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps us keep making content that unpacks these crucial stories. Section 3. Debunking the myth. What really happened in June 2024? Okay, so let's get to the big question. The story is dramatic. The consequences sound terrifying. But is it even true? Did a 50-year-old petrodollar pact actually expire on June 9, 2024? The simple, verifiable answer is no. The whole story of an expiring 50-year deal is a myth, born from a giant internet misunderstanding. Deep dives into declassified documents and government statements show no evidence of a single formal treaty signed in 1974 that forced oil to be sold in dollars or had a 50-year expiration date. So where did this story come from? The date is tied to the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation, which was established in June 1974. This was a real agreement about economic and military ties, but it had no clause about dollar-only oil sales and wasn't set to expire in 2024. It was a 5-year deal with options to extend. The panic seems to be a mix of unrelated events and a general anxiety about the dollar's future. The truth is, Saudi Arabia has never been legally forced to sell oil only in dollars. They did it because it made sense. The dollar was, and still is, the most stable and widely used currency in the world, making it the easiest choice for global trade. The reality is, the petrodollar system isn't being blown up by one political decision. It's more like a slow erosion from the tides of history. The cracks have been showing for years. The first big change was America's own energy boom. The shale revolution turned the U.S. from the world's biggest oil importer into a top producer. This changed everything. The U.S. didn't need Middle Eastern oil like it used to, and for the Saudis, America's security guarantee started to look less certain. At the same time, a new superpower was rising: China. China is now Saudi Arabia's biggest customer, buying more than a quarter of its oil exports. And for years, Beijing has been pushing to settle that trade in its own currency, the yuan. Saudi Arabia has been quietly accepting yuan for some of its oil sales to China for a while now. This isn't some secret betrayal. It's just smart business. Why force your biggest customer to use a different currency when you can just use theirs? The world is also becoming more multipolar. The rise of the BRICS nations, a group Saudi Arabia has joined, has created a powerful economic bloc that wants to build financial systems outside of U.S. control. They're exploring alternative payment networks and even a common currency to protect themselves from U.S. sanctions. So the collapse of the petrodollar isn't an event that happened on one Sunday in June. It's a process. It's a slow shift away from a world centered on the US dollar toward one with multiple currencies. And Saudi Arabia isn't blowing up the system. It's just adapting to a changing world. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. If you want to know what Saudi Arabia is really doing, forget the conspiracy theories and look at their actual playbook. Vision 2030. Launched in 2016 by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Vision 2030 is one of the most ambitious economic and social makeovers in modern history. The main goal is to free the Saudi economy from its total dependence on oil and build a sustainable future. For decades, the kingdom's fate rose and fell with the price of oil. Vision 2030 is a radical, multi-trillion-dollar plan to break that cycle and reinvent the country as a global hub for investment, tourism, and technology. The scale of this diversification is staggering. The government is pouring billions into brand new industries. Take tourism. The kingdom is building giga-projects like NEOM, a futuristic megacity, and the Red Sea Project, a luxury island resort. The country has already made incredible progress, smashing its initial goal of 100 million visitors in 2023, a full 7 years ahead of schedule. In technology, Saudi Arabia is using its low-cost energy to become a major hub for AI and data centers. They're also privatizing state-owned companies and aiming for the private sector to make up 65% of the economy. This is more than just economics. It's a huge social change. The number of women in the workforce, a key measure of modernization, has more than doubled in just a few years, soaring from around 17% in 2017 to over 36% by 2024, blowing past their 2030 target years early. The country is also investing heavily in entertainment, sports, and culture to improve life for its young population. So what does all this have to do with the dollar? Everything. As Saudi officials have said, the main goal is diversification, and their financial strategy has to be flexible to match. This isn't about geopolitics, it's about being pragmatic. When you're running a multi-trillion-dollar transformation, it makes no sense to be tied to a single currency. By accepting payments in yuan from China, rupees from India, and euros from Europe, Saudi Arabia is just matching its financial policy to its new, diversified trade partners. They aren't breaking a deal with America, they're making new deals with the rest of the world. They still hold hundreds of billions in U.S. assets and don't want to see the dollar collapse, but they are hedging their bets. This isn't an act of aggression. It's an act of economic self-preservation. The real story of Saudi Arabia's big pivot shows just how fast our world is changing, moving away from one dominant power to a more complex, multipolar system. If you want to understand these monumental shifts and what they mean for your own finances, consider supporting the channel by subscribing. Your support is what makes this independent research possible. So what's the bottom line? The sensational story that Saudi Arabia broke a 50-year-old pact, triggering the collapse of the petrodollar, is a myth. There was no formal treaty that was abandoned on June 9, 2024. The panic is based on a misunderstanding of an informal arrangement that has been slowly changing for decades. The reality is more complicated and honestly more interesting. The petrodollar system isn't dying in a big explosion. It's slowly fading as the world order that created it changes. The United States is no longer the only superpower. The rise of China, the growing influence of the global South, and America's own energy boom have all weakened the foundation of the dollar for oil world. Saudi Arabia isn't leading this charge, it's reacting to it. The kingdom's move to accept other currencies for its oil isn't a declaration of war on the dollar. It's a smart and necessary part of its ambitious Vision 2030 plan. As the country diversifies its economy, it's also diversifying its financial relationships. It's not about ending American dominance, but about building Saudi resilience in a world no longer dominated by one country. The US dollar will almost certainly remain the world's top reserve currency for a long time, just because of the massive size and stability of US financial markets. but its exorbitant privilege is fading. We are heading toward a multi-currency world where the dollar, the euro, the yuan, and maybe even digital currencies will share the stage. The end of the petrodollar era isn't one single event, but a transition to a new and more complex global financial system. The real question isn't whether the dollar will collapse overnight, but how the United States will adapt to a world where its financial supremacy is no longer absolute. What do you think this transition means for the global economy and your own financial future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.